Welcome back, friends, in the Anatomy Student Zone. Get ready to dive deeper into electrifying world of nervous system in part 2 of our mind-blowing series. I have taken all this content from the reference book of anatomy and have tried my best to summarize it, make it simpler and the conceptual for you. Because I know most of the students feel difficulty in understanding this topic. Hope this will help you a lot. In this part, I will talk about one component of peripheral nervous system, that is ganglia. Before moving towards the main topic, I will quickly review the anatomical and functional domain of nervous system as already discussed in previous video as well. Anatomically, the nervous system is divided into central nervous system, which consists of brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which consists of three components: cranial nerves, which are coming from brain, spinal nerves, which are coming from spinal cord, and their associated ganglia. When we talk about the functional domain, we know the nervous system is having two components: sensory or afferent and the motor or efferent component. It is important to know that the sensory component contains receptors, and these receptors sense different modalities of sensation. So it's quite obvious it should have somatic component that will receive information from our soma or body like our skin, skeleton, muscle, etc. And the visceral component, as the name indicates, will receive information from viscera. Why it's having somatic and the visceral component? Because it have to receive information from all muscles like skeleton muscle, cardiac, smooth, and also from glands. In fact, I will say from whole body. So the function of motor or efferent component is to send motor information to effectors, and the response, of course, will be either voluntary or involuntary. If the motor component send information to skeleton muscle, the response will be voluntary. And if the motor component send this information to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, the response will be involuntary. In nutshell, efferent component of peripheral nervous system is having somatic and the autonomic component. Somatic component innervates skeleton muscle, and the autonomic component innervates cardiac muscle, smooth muscles, and glands. Point to remember is that the autonomic nervous system is a component of peripheral nervous system that regulates the involuntary physiological process including heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and digestion. So autonomic nervous system is having two domains, a sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's also having a third domain, that is the enteric nervous system. But we will cover the details of autonomic nervous system in upcoming series. Moving towards the main topic, that is the peripheral nervous system that consists of three components: cranial nerve, spinal nerve, and their associated ganglia. First, I will talk about the ganglia. Ganglia are the collection of neuronal cell bodies, and these collections are found outside the central nervous system. This is very important image to understand the concept of ganglia. Have you ever thought where these ganglia are located in peripheral nervous system? So they are found in the somatic and the autonomic branches of the peripheral nervous system. Because these ganglia are located along the somatic and the autonomic branches of the peripheral nervous system, so on basis of this, we can classify them into two major groups. First group is sensory ganglia or spinal ganglia, and this is related to somatic nervous system. And the other group is autonomic ganglia, that is related to the autonomic nervous system. So sensory ganglia examples include the dorsal root ganglia and the ganglia of selected cranial nerves, because some cranial nerves are purely sensory, some are motor, and few are having mixed components. And also the few cranial nerves are also having the autonomic component as well. So autonomic ganglia include the sympathetic ganglia, parasympathetic ganglia, and it's important to know that the sympathetic ganglia are close to the spinal cord, and the parasympathetic, they are located close to the viscera or within the viscera. So simply we can say ganglia are sensory or the same name. This ganglia is having spinal or the dorsal root ganglia, cranial nerve ganglia, and the autonomic ganglia. So broadly we divide into three groups: spinal, cranial nerve ganglia, and autonomic ganglia. Anatomically, what will be the structure of ganglia or how they look like? As you can see, they are oval in shape because they contain the neuronal cell bodies and the satellite cells. And we know that satellite cells are the type of glial cells. And glial cells I have already covered in the part 1 of nervous system. And this is electron micrograph image of ganglion, and this is showing the neuronal cell bodies and the satellite cells. And when we see these ganglia under microscope, although this image is not a logical image, but it will make your concept clear that the sensory and the autonomic ganglia, they are logically similar, but they differ in type of neuron. As you can see, neurons are unipolar or the pseudo-unipolar in sensory ganglia, and they are multipolar in autonomic ganglia. First, we will cover sensory or the spinal ganglia, that is more famous with the name of dorsal root ganglia, or we can say DRG. Before going into the detail of the sensory neuron or the DRG, you should remember that the sensation of touch, pain, temperature, pressure, they are felt by the sensory neuron. Or some books have mentioned the sensory neuron as a primary sensory neuron, as the name indicate primary. So they are the key players in the sensory transduction and the transmission of the sensory information to higher center, where the somatic or the visceral are found in dorsal root ganglia. Have you ever thought where these primary sensory neurons are sitting in our body or where they are located in our body? So the answer is the cell bodies of these primary sensory neuron, whether they are somatic or they are visceral, they are found in the DRG or the dorsal root ganglia or the spinal ganglia. As their name indicates, dorsal root ganglia. So the dorsal root ganglia is found in the dorsal root of spinal nerve. So now another question is, what's dorsal root, what is spinal nerve? I will cover all this in next part of series of this nervous system. Remember, it's very important to know the structure of the spinal nerves also, because the spinal nerve are also important component of peripheral nervous system, the topic that we are covering right now. Now we will look into the sensory ganglia of cranial nerves. As the name indicates, the cranial nerves, so they are related with the cranial nerves, not spinal nerves. They are similar to the dorsal root ganglia. They are very special ganglia, I will say, because they are having special sensory function relating to cranial nerves. As we know, there are 12 pair of cranial nerves in our body, and these ganglia are related to those cranial nerves which carry sensory component, I will say geniculate ganglia, that is associated with the 7th cranial nerve, vestibular and the spiral ganglion, that is associated with the 8th cranial nerve, superior and the inferior ganglia of the vagus nerve, that is related with the 10th cranial nerve, and the glossopharyngeal ganglia, that is associated with 9th cranial nerve. After covering the above two ganglia, I will talk about the last, that is an autonomic ganglia. As the name indicates, it's related to the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system consists of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Hence, the autonomic ganglia are also of two types. They will be the sympathetic ganglia and parasympathetic ganglia. So, sympathetic are located close to the spinal cord, as already told you, while the parasympathetic are located within the viscera of the peripheral organ that they are going to innervate, or they are located near them. We have already described about the principal cells of the autonomic and the sensory ganglia. I have told you that the autonomic ganglia cells are the multipolar neurons, and the cell bodies of these neurons are surrounded by the satellite cells. We briefly covered the sympathetic and the parasympathetic ganglia, but there is also a prevertebral ganglia. So generally, we divide autonomic ganglia into three groups. Sympathetic chain ganglia, they are also known as paravertebral ganglia. Second group is prevertebral or collateral ganglia, and the third are parasympathetic or the terminal ganglia. But we will cover the detail of all these in the autonomic nervous system. Dear friends, that was all about one part of peripheral nervous system, that was ganglia. We will look into spinal nerve in next part. Thanks for watching. Keep subscribing for upcoming videos. Thank you so much.